This is Callan Diggs, reachingthefinishline.com, helping you to reach the finish line. In this video, I want to talk about the top 5 languages to thrive in this global economy. Many times, the importance of bilingual fluency is overlooked. But I want to kind of highlight the importance of it, and I'll do so in a little bit. But let's start with the top 5 languages that can help you thrive in this global economy. Now, you don't need to speak all five of these languages, obviously. Being bilingual should be sufficient. Okay, so let's start with number 5. Okay, number 5 is Russian. Okay, now many people think that, oh, well, I shall learn Russian and I'm never going to go to Russia to, let's say, study or to work or to maybe spend any length of time there, maybe like a missionary trip. But the Russian language is not limited to the country of Russia. Okay, in the United States, there are many Russians. It's a huge Russian population. So you have that option. And then you have a lot of former Soviet countries. These countries like Estonia, these countries like Ukraine, Georgia. These types of countries who still speak Russian, that's kind of one of their secondary languages, if it's not dual with the primary language there. And it could be very useful if you're living in these places like Georgia, Estonia, Ukraine, if you're living in American neighborhoods that has a kind of that has a Russian influence. That can be a great way to be able to thrive. If it's nonprofit, or if it's studying, or if it's working, that's a language that often gets overlooked. That is definitely worth your consideration. Number 4 is French. French is also a language that sometimes get overlooked because people think, oh, well, I'm not going to France, or, I don't have, I have no incentive because they may not be interested in France. But again, there's a lot of ignorance because there are countries that also speak the language. You have several African countries that speak French. You have certain places in Canada that also speaks French. Places like Quebec, Montreal. And having French fluency can open up a lot of doors as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Whether you're planning on being international or domestic, French is also a language that can open up doors of opportunity. Number 3 is Spanish. Now, many people know that if you live in the United States, many people know the importance of, or at least the advantage of speaking Spanish, especially living in places like Texas or Florida or pretty much any southern state in the United States. Being fluent in Spanish is considered an asset. Even places like here in Colorado, there's a lot of significant Latino populations, and where it would be helpful to know Spanish. Fortunately, I speak Spanish. I lived in Ecuador, Mexico, and Spain, so that can definitely work to one's advantage if you're looking to do business, if you're looking to work for an employer, if you're looking to study some type of nonprofit or study abroad, maybe for a degree that's in another language, those things can be helpful. Number two. Number two is Mandarin. Now, as maybe you've already know, there's at least 2 billion people in the world that speak Mandarin. So essentially, about a third of the world's population speaks Mandarin. China is the only country that speaks it, but in that Asian region, it's the economic powerhouse of that region, and it influences a lot of other surrounding countries to speak the language as well, because it is sort of like a gateway language to do business. There's a lot of great universities in China, and it can definitely open up a lot of opportunities by having that fluency. And then the last one, and probably the obvious one, is English. And that's a language that you probably already understand because you're watching this video, you're listening to me. Whether it's your native language or whether it's your second language, it is the global language. There's many businesses, or rather there's many countries around the world who do business in English. Now, as you have different dialects in Russian or French or Portuguese or even Mandarin, the same applies to English. You have the British dialect of English is quite distinct, as compared to the American type of English. But nevertheless, if you're not already speaking English fluently, I definitely, if it's your second language, I definitely recommend that you become fluent in English. Even with myself, for a person that speaks English, I try to increase my understanding of the other English dialects so I can be relatable to people. So if I'm living in England, or if I'm doing business in South Africa or Australia, it may be advantageous to me if I can actually speak their dialect. Because some people, even though America still kind of has the perception as, being the greatest country in the world, and, I guess to many countries, just being American presents a good reputation, has a good reputation among a lot of other people. There's the flip side, and where many people like to do business or like to work with, or be more open to connect with people that's relatable to them, people that's like them. And while you may not be from that country, if you can actually speak, in this case, their dialect, that can really maximize your chances of creating strong relationships. And again, that applies to whether the language is Spanish or Portuguese or Russian or French. But even if you see that if you feel like learning another language should be a challenge, maybe you can take a gradual step in the right direction by learning another dialect of the language you're speaking. So if you speak English, kind of learn the British dialect. What words do British people use as opposed to words that English people use? Okay, in Australia, Canada, South Africa, what are those kind of those differences in language or in grammar? That can be a step in the right direction if you're not necessarily ready to make a leap into starting to be fluent in another language. However, learning another language has been easier than ever. Okay, you have Duolingo, you have Rosetta Stone, you have Mango Languages. There's so many language learning resources that you can either get for free or you can get very cheaply that can help you be able to become fluent, which will increase your profile as a global citizen. You know, speaking a second language, you can take that into many different directions, and we'll talk about that more in a future video. But many people, they go to college to speak a second language. You know, when it comes to a Spanish degree, it doesn't necessarily make you significantly more attractive than a person who can speak the language just as well, write the language just as well without the degree. But we'll talk about that in another video. Just something for you to consider. This is Callan Diggs. It's my intention for you to reach the finish line, and you can start by going to reachingthefinishline.com. Also, if you want to stay tuned for tomorrow's video, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. Until next time, I hope you're reaching your finish line.